Most of you must have seen children with cerebral palsy, yes? So all of you have seen cerebral palsy, right? So I'll be talking on, because it's a very big topic. So first I'll be describing about cerebral palsy and then later on management of cerebral palsy. So all of us know that these are permanent disorders of movement and posture which causes activity limitation. These are non-progressive disturbances which occurs in the developing fetal or the infant brain. So many theories say that if by 1 year there is some defect in the brain that can lead to cerebral palsy. Other studies say that by 2 years, if there is any insult to the brain, it will be called as cerebral palsy. And with it, you'll have disturbances of sensation, cognition, communication. You can have epilepsy and musculoskeletal problems, which we commonly encounter in rehabilitation. So it is very important for PGs to know that it is not a single disease. There is a wide variety of static neuromotor impairment. It's like an umbrella term, okay? And it is occurring due to insult to the developing brain. The musculoskeletal pathology will be progressive. Why? Because there will be an imbalance between the growth of the bone and the muscles. And this damage is permanent, okay? It cannot be cured, but you can minimize the consequences. So what are the risk factors? So 70 to 80% of cerebral palsy are due to prematurity, antenatal causes, which are the most common, followed by 10% of perinatal, which we mainly come across birth asphyxia and other traumatic causes. But if you take care in the obstetrical period, so you can avoid or you can reduce the risk of cerebral palsy. And due to this prematurity, the most common MRI finding which we encounter is periventricular leukomalacia. So it is very important for all of you to know that the lesion in the brain vary in size, site, and time of occurrence. Most lesions occur in the 24-week post-menstrual age to term age, okay? And there is, because of this variation in timing of the insult to the brain, the lesions are different neuroplastic reactions are there, and they have different associated neuropathology. As a result of it, it is an heterogeneous entity. And best early diagnostic and best intervention methods differ in each subgroup of the children. So currently it is said that prediction of cerebral palsy in early infancy is best when it is based on multiple assessment techniques and a series of assessments. So if the infant is admitted in the NICU, so you have to do a combination of the neonatal imaging, which is done in the ICU, as well as the gross motor assessment, which is being done. That is the best predictor of CP. And if the infant is not admitted in the ICU, then we have to see the type of milestones achievement and the neurological assessment, but that is a non-optimal way. So for you to diagnose cerebral palsy, it is very important. Please take a detailed history. Now, what we do is the child is coming with the parent. The parent will say that my child is not able to sit or walk, is having spasticity, and what you'll do, you will just, the child is, most of you I have seen, when I was a PG and later on also, I have seen in my department also, the child is sitting in the lap of the mother and you will just do ROM, okay, the tightness is there, okay, you'll just write medicines, okay, go PT, OTNs, STN, then you leave the child. So this is not a proper way of assessment of a child with cerebral palsy, because it is not only the motor abnormality, there are so many things associated with it. So you have to differentiate the cerebral palsy from other various progressive causes which are there and classify the type, severity, the various musculoskeletal impairments which we encounter like spasticity, balance, weakness, etc. And proper referral is very important to other departments like vision, hearing, etc. Okay, so this is an evidence-based algorithm for diagnosis. That is, if the infant has any risk, which I've already spoken, if the infant is having any risk for cerebral palsy, has an abnormal motor development, and also an abnormal neuroimaging, then the child has cerebral palsy. And if doesn't have any risk, or doesn't have any abnormal motor development, or doesn't have any abnormal neuroimaging, then the child is not having cerebral palsy, but still 10 to 20% can have cerebral palsy. So it is very important to diagnose between the progressive disorders and the non-progressive disorders, and especially there are many, genetic disorders like metachromatic leukodystrophy and other disorder which might mimic cerebral palsy. So it is very important to assess these children properly. And in non-progressive disorders, especially in autism, I'd like to say, because many child, they'll walk on toes. So as soon as you see the child, you'll feel, okay, this is a spastic child, but when you'll make the child lie down and you'll assess the tone would be normal. So that is why it is very important to have a detailed history with the parent, as well as you have to examine the child properly. Okay, then it's a big set of examination outline: neurological examination, motor system examination, sensory. You have to see, look for the primitive reflexes, musculoskeletal, and the functional examination in sitting, balance, and gait. It is very important for all of you to know about the primitive reflexes, because primitive reflexes are the brainstem reflexes which generally integrate by 6 months of age. And then, the cortical reflexes, the postural reflexes, the protective reflexes, they come. Okay, so until and unless these reflexes integrate, the child will have motor issues and will not be able to attain the developmental milestones. So all of you should be knowing about the gross motor, fine motor, cognitive, personal, social, and communication milestones. And accordingly, the child can have a mild, moderate, or severe degree of developmental delay, but a significant delay is said when the performance is 2 or more standard deviation below the mean on the various standard tests. So classification, motor classification, yes, all of us are aware, this is the motor classification. Then depending on the site involved, it's a topographical classification. Then 70 to 80% are spastic. Why? Because there is damage to the corticospinal pathway due to affection of the pyramidal system, and about 15 to 20% are extrapyramidal cases where there is affection of the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. Then it is very important to differentiate between hypotonic CP and the low motor neuron disorders. So in hypotonic CP, you will have a central hypotonia. The child will be floppy. There will be delayed motor milestones and feeding difficulties. So you'll feel that the child is having some low motor neuron disorder like spinomuscular atrophy, but in that you will see that there will be persistent primitive reflexes and there will be hyperreflexia, okay? And if it is a lower motor neuron, then there will be peripheral hypotonia, okay? The limbs will be having reduced tone, the child will be floppy, and there will be areflexia. So these are the two basically primitive reflexes and hyperreflexia. This is how you can differentiate between hypotonic CP and any cause of pediatric disability due to low motor neuron. Okay, then you have a functional classification of gross motor function classification system, and for hand assessment you have a manual ability classification system. So this is GMFCS, level 1 is independent and level 5 is totally dependent, and accordingly MACS classification from grade 1 to grade 5. Then there is a classification of the sitting ability. You have a hands-free sitter, you have a hand-dependent sitter. So you can see it here. The child is sitting independently. Here the child has to sit with the support of the hand, and again here the child has to be brought to a sitting position called a prop sitter. Then classification of ambulation, you have community ambulators, the child is free to move. Then you have household ambulators, therapeutic ambulators where they have to walk for a short distance with the help of a rollator or a helper, and non-ambulators, that is the child has to be on the wheelchair. Then what is a good prognosis for independent walking? So if the child has head control by 9 months, sitting by 24 months, and floor mobility by 30 months, it's a good prognosis, the child will walk. And similarly, if there is no head control by 20 months, no sitting by 48 months, and no floor mobility, that is crawling by 48 months, then the child has a poor prognosis for walking. And what are the factors affecting prognosis? So if you have absence of postural reflexes, the cortical reflexes like the Landau and the parachute sign, and presence of primitive reflexes like the Moro, asymmetrical tonic, and the STNR, When the timing of achievement of the developmental milestone, we have already talked about mild, moderate, and severe type, and the degree of involvement of the neurological system, the motivation to move, family compliance, what are the environmental factors, and all these are, and other comorbid conditions as well as the medical issues of the child. Okay, so once you start examination of the child, it is very important that the child should be relaxed. Child should not be crying. Okay, so first you have to evaluate why is the child crying. अब वो भूखा तो नहीं है, उसको वॉशरूम तो नहीं जाना, उसको कहीं दर्द तो नहीं हो रहा, क्या वो पेरेंट्स से सेपरेटेड है, आपने पकड़ के बच्चे को काउच पे डाल दिया एंड मदर इज स्टैंडिंग ऑन द अदर साइड ऑफ द रूम. सो इट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट दैट द चाइल्ड शुड बी रिलैक्स्ड, always accompanied by parents, mother or grandmother. Female has to be there, mother or grandmother. Okay, that is a different scenario if the child doesn't have his or her mother. So, but please, you have to see that mother or grandmother has to be there. Then these are the various neurological complications like muscle weakness, you have musculoskeletal condition like contractures, you have various associated conditions associated with cerebral palsy. It is very important, once you assess the child, you have to see the posture because it is influenced by spasticity and primitive reflexes. So different type of postures, we see hyperextension of the upper limb as well as the lower limb, we see scissoring, we see high guard, posture, there is persisting fisting in the child. In the spine, you have to see whether the deformity is postural or structural, and how do you have to assess when the child is ambulatory standing or in forward flexion, and if the child is non-ambulatory sitting position, you can examine, and accordingly you have to see the scoliosis, kyphosis, and so on. It is very important to examine the hip, because by 2 years of age, there is some degree of, subluxation or dislocation, and that will depend on the GMFCS score also. And it is seen by 18 months of age, especially in spastic quadriplegia, and if GMFCS 4 and 5, they do have some form of subluxation or dislocation. Then you should be knowing examination of the lower limb, the various tests of the hip, knee, ankle, and foot. It is very important for all of you to know. Okay, then gait in the child, because for a proper gait, you need a complete coordination of the brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves, muscles, bones, and joints. Stability is a prerequisite, and foot clearance and swing is required. So for that, you have to do proper evaluation. You can observe, do video recordings. Now there are computerized gait analysis, and you should be knowing about different type of gait, crouch, jump, knee, and so on. Now, what is the goal of management in cerebral palsy? So, our management as a rehab physician is to minimize disability, and we have to promote independence and full participation in the society. The team must work together in harmony for a success. Okay, so being a rehab physician, you have a team of your doctors, you have a team of other allied health professionals, and the aim is to lead a normal life of the child as close as possible. Parents should have a realistic evaluation of the child. You should not say, I've seen many people saying, जैसे जैसे बच्चा बड़ा होगा अपने आप सही हो जाएगा. So this is a very wrong thing to say. Never say all these things. Okay, and you have to set a goal for every child because it is individualized. So very important, the rehabilitation is mainly focused on the neuroplasticity, and here we know by as a result of any injury or any activity or training, there is modification of the nervous system on the cellular and the behavioral level. There is lesion, sprouting, and unmasking. And there is reorganization in the structure, function, and connections of the nervous system. So active training enhances neuroplasticity, and it results in reorganization of the cortical maps. And this is based on the motor learning theory, which are the key factors of recovery, like how the number of repetitions you are doing, the duration, different tasks should be segmented, and the motivation which you are providing to the child, and proper instructions have to be there. So this is the treatment team. All of us are aware of that. You have a rehabilitation physician, along with you have an orthopedic surgeon, you have a neurologist, you have a neurosurgeon, ophthalmologist, ENT specialist, and so on. And you have your other health professional like physiotherapist, occupational therapist, and so on. So you'd like to investigate the child. So MRA is said to be of high yield. That is more than 80% MRA is able to identify the abnormality. And if you see that in neuroimaging there is no specific structural abnormalities, there is developmental deterioration, there is a regression of the milestones. So in those cases, you have to go for some metabolic or genetic analysis. And we are admitting children with cerebral palsy in our ward, and we do find about 70 to 80% children have anemia as well as vitamin D deficiencies. So what you do in infancy, you have to start with early intervention, okay? So early intervention, you have to act with the child as soon as you see the child. Maybe if you are in the hospital, you can go into the PICU, your NN ward, or in the nursery. And early intervention, you have to promote the sensory motor development. How? By various positioning techniques, sensory stimulation, various exercises, because we want to increase the mobility of the child to explore the surroundings. And here we use various positioning techniques, carrying and the feeding techniques. Okay, and why do we want to intervene early? Because myelation occurs by 2 years of age, and the gross motor and greater extent of fine motor milestones are reached by 7 to 36 months. The child acquires the ability to understand most of the languages. Personality traits are also formed, and development occurs in all the areas. Okay? And what is more important is environmental influences. So lot of, you need a good a family who's very much oriented to help the child. So these are the various early intervention techniques, how to hold the child, various type of exercises are there, Positioner. Now this is a very good example. You can see this child in opisthotonus positioning. Now the therapist has hold the child, made the child sit on a corner chair. So there is a midline symmetry is there. So the child is like that. If you are talking to the child, you're holding, the child will not see. So you have to hold the child properly, make an eye contact, midline position, symmetry has to be there. Okay? Similarly, you can tell the parents to have, you can see the laborers जो गांव में काम करते हैं वो अपना दुपट्टा या कुछ लटका के बच्चे को लटका देते. This is very good for positioning. Similarly, hand-eye coordination, various techniques can be told. Again, there is a bodily symmetry, midline symmetry is there. Then various vestibular and balancing stimulations can be done for the child. Different sitting balance improvement in a corner sitter, or assistance with a pillow, or you can provide CP chair also. Then these therapeutic exercises are dependent on the child's neurological capacity. So, बहुत बार हमारे डिपार्टमेंट में आते हैं कि मेरा कोई रिलेटिव है, उसका बच्चा ठीक हो गया तो मेरा बच्चा भी ठीक हो जाएगा. तो दिस इज एवरी चाइल्ड हैज इट्स ओन न्यूरोलॉजिकल लीजन. उसका अलग साइट है, उसका लीजन कितना बड़ा है, सो इट विल डिपेंड ऑन दैट. ओके, एंड एक्लेक्टिक अप्रोच हैज टू बी डन फॉर दीज एक्सरसाइजेस. सो मेन एम ऑफ एक्सरसाइज क्या है? वी वॉन्ट द टोन टू बी नॉर्मल. We want the primitive reflexes to be integrated. We want the child to attain the developmental milestone. We want postural reflexes, all those things, so that the child becomes independent in whatever capacity. So this is the main aim of therapeutic exercises. So you have a lot of neurofacilitation technique in the form of NDT, PNF, etc. Okay, so different, carrying techniques. If the child is having spasticity, then in opisthotonus, you have to tell the parent that how to hold the child. The back should be in front of the chest, and there should be eye contact with whomsoever is coming, and both legs should be separated also. So these are the various techniques. Wedge है, घर पे pillow है, wedge पे हम they need not buy anything expensive. वो हम घर पे ही बहुत कुछ उनको help कर सकते हैं. Similarly, different type of stretching exercises. So you have to stretch the spastic muscle, and you have to strengthen the antagonist muscle, because spastic muscles are weak also. So it is very important for them to be strengthening. Then फिर upper limb training activities of daily limb के बहुत सारे, जैसे इस type का, this is a board where different type of buttons हैं, shoelaces and other things, velcro, and for fine hand activities हम बच्चों को बता सकते हैं, right? Then there are many sport activities. Cardiovascular conditioning is very important, especially for a child sitting on the wheelchair. Okay, and play activities have to be there. So here you can see the different type of play and other activities are being done. So exercises are also being done, and the child is also happy. Okay, so what are the benefits of exercise? They are promoting the neurological development, they are strengthening the weak spastic muscles, and they are improving mobility. But what are the limitations? Long extensive, कितने पेरेंट्स होते हैं बोलते हैं हम सारे दिन एक्सरसाइज कराते हैं 4-4, 5-5 घंटे. नो, दिस इज बैड. Why? Because it is interfering with learning, schooling, family and peer relationship. सारे दिन उसको खाली एक्सरसाइज थोड़ी करता रहेगा. पेरेंट को भी तो, मदर को भी अपनी लाइफ चाहिए, सबको अपनी लाइफ चाहिए. एंड बच्चा ऑल्सो नीड्स टू गो आउट एंड हैव लॉट ऑफ एनवायरमेंटल इनपुट्स. ओके, and the dose of therapeutic exercise is not evidence based, so nobody knows what is the optimal dose for exercise. So from infancy to childhood, again you have to keep on doing the exercises, you have to focus on the independent mobility, and you have to see how you can make the child stand erect, because if the child is lying down or sitting, then there are chances of developing osteoporosis in the child. So in whatever way, you have to make him stand straight, okay? And here only in childhood, we start with the various interventions. All of you are aware of different type of intervention, like for segmental or localized intervention, we are giving botulinum toxin A, and it is a strong evidence level A, especially for the upper and the lower limbs. It is effective and a safe treatment. And but there is insufficient evidence that will improve the motor function. It's not that कि अगर GMFCs 2 है तो GMFCs 1 हो जाएगा after botulinum toxin. So it has to be a localized, this thing has to be there, and all of you are aware how does it act. And nowadays many of us have ultrasound guided, so it has become more easy to give a specific dose in a specific muscle. Then there are various medicines are there, centrally acting muscle relaxants for generalized spasticity. Then you should be knowing what is the level of evidence, which dose has to, how much dose has to be given, and what side effects they can have. So you are giving diazepam, oral baclofen, tizanidine is also being given. Then intrathecal baclofen pump, there is an insufficient evidence against it, okay? So then orthopedic surgery, what are the goals? The goal is, if the child has a walking potential, functional ambulation is the goal, and we operate to achieve a good hip and knee extension and a plantigrade stable feet. And those child who do not have a walking potential, they are only, so goal is to achieve a good sitting balance. They should have a straight spine, horizontal pelvis, and stable hips. That's all we want, okay? So what are the goals? That we want to reduce spasticity in a selective manner, okay? So it's not that ki whatever spastic muscle, no, you don't have to operate on them, or you don't have to give botulinum toxin injection, because we want minimum spasticity, to make the child stand erect and do function. Usko ekdam hame lose nahi karna hai. We have to correct the contractures which are hindering the functions, like for pelvic hygiene, spastic quadriplegia, yes, you can go for adductor tenotomy and obturator neurotomy. We have to preserve the power generators, mainly the hip muscles, okay? And we have to correct the LAD, and the subluxation dislocation of the hip is very important. So you have to see for the femoral anteversion and all. And when do you time surgery? Whenever there's the CNS maturation, you have to acquire for the ambulation. You have to see for the ambulation potential of the child, and the rate at which the contraction and the LAD is developing. Then we are prescribing orthosis also, and the most common orthosis being prescribed in CP is the ankle foot orthosis, because it keeps the foot in the plantigrade position. There is a stable base of support during stance phase. It is preventing foot drop in swing phase, as well as it also preventing the night contractures. Okay, then various assistive devices you have to see. It depends on patient, child to child, what assistive device you want to give. Then in adolescent age group, you have to focus on education, vocation, and how you can integrate the child in the community. So you have to keep on doing. It's not that you are, you are leaving your drugs, or you are leaving your surgery, or you are leaving your therapeutic exercise. Along with that, you have to see that the child is going to school. Now there is, reservation, about 4% reservation is there in the school as well as in the higher education. So as a rehab professional, you should be aware of all this. And again, you have to focus on the cardiovascular fitness. So when the child becomes adult, you have to see how the transition is being made. There are many vocational rehabilitation centers where you can refer these children. And yes, they can also exercise their right to vote. So then the management, you have neurosurgery, robotics, and you name it and you have it, but all of them are of limited evidence. So what are the other comorbidities in cerebral palsy, which as a rehab professional you should be knowing? So it is not only the motor impairment. As I told, it is a big umbrella term, okay? So you have to look for the pain, what is the intellectual disability, then the child is non-verbal, so you have to work on speech. The child is having seizures, behavioral disorders, bladder incontinence, sleep disorders, vision impairment. The child is not able to eat properly, hearing impairment. So you have to see everything. So in rehab, it's not कि ठीक है आए हमने बता दिया कि ये exercise करनी है, ये medicine लेनी है, botulinum toxin लगा दिया, छोड़ दिया. No, it's not like that. In totality, you have to see the child. Okay, so feeding problems are present in 50%, 58% of the cases. Lot of dental hygiene problems are there in these children, which you have to see and you have to refer for a proper dental care. And in non-ambulatory cases, it has been seen that by 10 years of age, they do have osteopenia. So that is why you have to make them, in whatever way, try to make them stand erect with the help of some support. Then caregiver health is very important. How many of you see the caregiver health? I mean, how many of you ask whether the caregiver is having any backache or knee pain or pain in the neck? No one. Okay. So this is very important. So as soon as you ask the caregiver, आपको कोई problem है बच्चे को उठाने, then you see, they'll come. Yes, ma'am, back में pain है, neck में pain है, knee में बहुत pain हो रहा है, but who will? Nobody will, look after. So as a rehab professional, because next time, they will have two parchas with them, for themselves and for their child. So you just prescribe, kuch nahi hai. All these are postural problems. Okay? And low socio-economic background se jahan pe hamare hospital, we are working with that, and all those who are in a government setup. So please, you can, simple medicine, you can prescribe, calcium or vitamin D or multivitamin, just tell them few exercises, that is sufficient. And caregiver education is very important. You have to tell, because cerebral palsy में जो पेरेंट है वो खाली चाहेगा मेरा बच्चा चलेगा कब, उनको और किसी से मतलब नहीं है कि उसको सीजर है, वो बोल नहीं पा रहा, वो अजीब सी बिहेवियरल डिसऑर्डर है, उसको खाली है वो मेरा बच्चा चलेगा कब. So you have to please take out some time, at least 10 minutes in a group of, parents. You can just tell them about cerebral palsy and how it goes about. First day prognosis नहीं बताना है कि ये बिल्कुल ठीक नहीं होगा, वो next time आपके पास आएगा ही नहीं. They'll start going to quacks. Okay? So recreation and sports is very important in these children, and you should be aware of the Rights to Person with Disability Act. How many of you are aware of this act? Okay, good. So there are special provisions for person with benchmark disability. What is a benchmark disability? 40%, right. Okay, so and unique disability ID, you must be aware of that. Okay, then you have to tell these parents about the disability certificate, the disability pension, railway concession certificate, National Trust. Are you aware of National Trust? So National Trust is a society under Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment which looks after cerebral palsy, intellectual disability, autism and multiple disability, okay? And then there is a Niramaya health insurance. So there is no health insurance for these children, right? But this Niramaya health insurance is providing about 1 lakh of rupees per year for these children. Then there are various education schemes like Disha, Sambhav, etc. And then ADIP scheme for orthosis and etc. Okay, so in rehab, yes, all of us do celebrate International Day for Person with Disability. 6th October is coming, it is a World Cerebral Palsy Day. So here, this is the only day where we don't do anything. So we make the parents or the children, they perform some activity. So they feel, very happy, and many times just before this day, they will come and they'll ask, ma'am, koi program hai kya, we want to perform. So they are very happy because for most of them, the hospital is the only place where they are going out of their house, okay? So we try to, encourage their talent. And these are our 3 cases with cerebral palsy. He's Vipul, he's pursuing MBBS in KGMU. He has just Montec, he has got a government job a few days back only, and she is a government teacher. So in the end, I'd just like to say, as postgraduate, you should be knowing that it's not only a single entity, an umbrella term where you, along with the motor symptoms, you have to see other things also, like the vision, the hearing, the intellect, the speech of the child, and other impairments if the child is having. And please do refer them to other specialties, and success will depend upon the neurological capacity. Please educate the caregivers regarding cerebral palsy. They should have reasonable expectations. It's not that कि मेरा बच्चा बड़ा होगा अपना आप ठीक हो जाएगा. No. Try to fulfill whatever is the maximum potential of the child, be it physical, intellectual, or psychological. Recreation is very important, and start teaching them about different type of schools which are there. You have a regular school, you have an integrated school, you have special schools, and also the vocation of the child. So in whatever form he can do vocation, and if he is not able to go for vocation, then he can do some simple things at home also, and that for that, it's not that he'll, sit and he'll watch TV or start playing with the mobile, because then they will have a lot of behavioral disorders. And we are getting, children, adolescent children who were fine, but now they are not going anywhere, thus involved in the mobile or the TV. So it is because then it is very difficult for the family. And as physicians also, we don't know what to do. So all this is there. So you have to see the child. You are not only treating the child, you have to treat the whole family. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, like if a child comes once in OPD, like around 14 years age, and when by taking the history, we find out that at the age of 6 months, he is having TBI. So now whether to label it CP or TBI, if hemi picture is there at the age of 14 years, neglected CP was, neglected was there, no any treatment previously he was done. Now he directly came at 14 years of age.
So previously he was diagnosed as a case of cerebral palsy?
No, not diagnosed anywhere, nothing. Directly come at 14-year age कि sir ऐसे ये चल नहीं पा रहा, half side paralysis is there. So but while taking out history, we find out that TBI history was there at the age of 6 months.
So 6 months hai na? So you can say it's cerebral palsy.
We can say.
Yeah, and in brackets you can write post TBI sequelae also. Because of TBI, he has developed this brain lesion, and because 6 months ka hai, so you can diagnose as cerebral palsy.
And ma'am, can we label CP before 2 years of age or not?
Yes, you can.
We can label.
Because that's what I said before, because in some literature it is saying by 1 year of age, in others it is written 2 years. So you can...
Ma'am, what is your opinion about posterior or reverse walker in practice?
Yeah. So, we have both type of walkers, anterior and posterior walker. So, what we do is, we make the, child walk with both the anterior rollator as well as the posterior rollator. So, those children who have a tendency, of extension fall, so they are very good in posterior rollators. In spasticity, okay, if extensor thrust is there, so in those children, you have a posterior rollator, so he has to, hold with the railings, and he will walk like this. So that is also good. But in few cases which I feel ki posterior rollator will be good, the child is having difficulty, then I try with the anterior rollator and the child is able to walk. Okay, so there is no clear-cut definition. Yes, in literature it is written for, increase in spasticity, you give a posterior rollator. But in practice, it is better always, to clinically examine the child with both type of walker, both type of rollators.
So if we are giving posterior rollator, it should be only for therapeutical use, or it can be for functional use also?
Yes, it can be for functional use.
Oh.
See, posterior rollator पे वो तभी चलेगा ना कि थोड़ा सा उसका stability होगी, right? जो upper limb है उसका coordination होगा, इतना टोन नहीं होगा, उसका ग्रिप भी ठीक होगा, वो पकड़ के थोड़ा थोड़ा चल पाएगा. तो यस, बट प्रॉब्लम इज दैट कि जहाँ लो सोशो इकोनॉमिक है, हम जो रोलेटर वगैरह देते हैं ना, वो यूज़ नहीं करते हैं. वो बोलते हैं मैम हमारा तो कमरा ही एक छोटा सा है, तो ये कहाँ चलेगा, मेरे पास तो जगह ही नहीं है रखने की. सो दीज आर द प्रॉब्लम, जो प्रैक्टिकल प्रॉब्लम्स वी फेस. बट डेफिनेटली दैट शुड नॉट डिटर यू फ्रॉम प्रिस्क्राइबिंग, बिकॉज तुम तो एक डॉक्टर के हिसाब से तुम प्रिस्क्राइब करो. सो डेफिनेटली यू शुड प्रिस्क्राइब. वो कहीं बाहर सड़क पे भी चला लेते हैं वो लोग, बाहर के एरिया में पार्क में लेके जा सकते हैं.
थैंक यू.
Thank you, ma'am. It was very useful presentation. I have one doubt, like when we should not go for surgery. Like for example, we have two patients who are childhood, and one patient is childhood, one is adolescent. They are walking already with their own deformities, not like a normal person. Like they are actively walking with a good balance, but with all the deformities in the hip, knee, and ankle. But always the question arises: should we go for surgery and correct all the deformities and correct the gait? But we are afraid, since the patient is already stable in its own gait, so should we disturb it or we should not?
See, if the child is, I am talking from my experience. I have a lot of senior people with me also. They can also comment. But in my experience, I have seen if the child is walking properly, okay, then you assess what is the tone, how much is the strength. Okay, so if the child is having weak extensors, weak dorsiflexors, okay, then it's better, not to go for surgery. If the child is maintaining, but हाँ, अगर उसमें biomechanics change हो रहे हैं, crouch gait increase हो रहा है, then you should go for surgery. And that's what I feel. Otherwise, it is open for discussion. Yeah, sure.
So this question of surgery in cerebral palsy children should be analyzed very carefully, and you should understand the natural history of progression of many children. So if you have a good follow-up with that child, you know that you'll be able to reach the child and they will come to you. You should keep good track of them. So most of the cerebral palsy diplegic, when you look at them, if they are a diplegic where lower limbs are involved, upper limb is okay, they are otherwise trainable, educable, best is to follow them up to, if they are walking, like you said, with deformities, but not falling, maybe they will need an aid and appliances. If you actually follow that child from birth to about 13, 14, you'll see the progression and the deformities actually change. If somebody is walking, with equinus when they are about 3 to 5 years of age, there is no guarantee that they'll continue to be an equinus walker throughout their life. The general progression of diplegia is they start with bilateral equinus gait, then gradually the midfoot starts breaking, then gradually the knee starts bending, hip starts bending, and they end up with a crouch gait. For diplegics, I'm saying. So the progression after crouch, if you don't touch them, they will keep walking, but as the upper body grows and becomes heavier, the crouch keeps on increasing. When the crouch keeps on increasing, the energy consumption by the muscle is going to be large. Muscle gets tired very easily. The patellofemoral joint reaction forces are high. They start getting pain. So once they reach a point where pain is not tolerable and the muscles are not holding the knee in that position, it's very, very difficult. You try to stand like this for a couple of minutes, you find it very difficult. Then this child stops walking. And once the child stops walking and then you intervene surgically, then your outcomes are going to be very poor. So if you are following a cerebral diplegic child at around 8 to 14 years of age, when the bones are actually maturing and you know that you can make some corrections, these are called lever arm dysfunction corrections. You need to understand the lever arm dysfunctions which happen at ankle, knee and hip. Once you're able to understand that, including the femoral torsions and the tibial torsions, then most of the interventions happen between 10 to 14 years of age, because the corrections are done, and most of the corrections are done at all levels at the same time. So that's where, a little bit of gait analysis, radiology, and looking at old videos of the child and all comes into a picture. So it's not an easy question whether you operate or not. You have to follow them up, but if the deformity is significantly progressing, please analyze them, think about it, look at what all deformities can be corrected so that the child ends up walking straight. Initially, after surgery, the child will need a lot of training, will need an AFO for some time, probably some crutches also. But the goal is to straighten out the knee and hip, reduce the crouch, and over a period of time, we have seen that we have been able to wean them off the AFO also. So it's a question which needs to be understood. Each child is different, each deformities are different, and all children cannot be operated upon also. They should be trainable and educable also. If you are otherwise doing surgery, it will be a deformity correction surgery so that you can do nursing care well for that child, or you can handle the child easily. Walkers, be very careful why you're doing it, which standard lengthening procedures are not in now. There's hardly any evidence. It causes more harm. If you see an equinus person at 8 age and you correct the equinus, you're causing the crouch to happen much more earlier than what the natural history is. So be a little careful on that, discuss it, look at it again and again, and then make a decision.
Thank you,
So
sir.
many children do come to us after orthopedic surgery also, and again, the spasticity has occurred. Why? Because they were not told by the orthopedician how to go post, surgery rehab. So again, that is very important.
Patients start to walk in crouch. He might be 10, 12, 15 years. Crouch is increasing, sir. I have one doubt. If there is a crouch, anyway, we are going to loosen the hamstrings, lengthen the hamstrings. Sir, do you have any experience with intervention in hip, like hip flexors? Because for strengthening the extensors, you should have lengthened the hip flexors like that.
So if you see somebody in crouch and you think the hamstrings, I mean, if you examine the child, the popliteal angle will be bad, hamstrings will be short, tight. That doesn't mean that you lengthen the hamstrings. So pure hamstring lengthening is actually out. You should not do it, because the moment you lengthen the hamstrings, you might have a pelvic tilt. The hip flexion deformity will increase. Hamstring comes from the tibia to your ischial tuberosity. So once you lengthen it, your pelvis is actually going to tilt. Your hip flexion deformity is going to increase. So only hamstring lengthening might not be a very good idea. Probably these children, if you personally are convinced, this child, if I give him more hamstring length, might be able to walk a little more straight, then one way of testing it out is put Botox, if you can afford good level amount of Botox, and that might give you some therapeutic and diagnostic value there. But by and large, most of the crouch is because of ankle. Some are because of the tight hamstrings. So till you correct the ankle, push the knee back, you have that, GRF going behind the knee joint, which is causing the crouch. You need to bring the GRF in front somehow, or push it as much as possible so that the knee is pushed back. And most of the surgeries on hamstring now are either do very minimal fractional hamstring lengthening or transfer semitendinosus to the quadriceps mechanism, or if you want more tightening, you transfer some bit of rectus behind also. But most of the flexion deformities are corrected by osteotomies, supracondylar osteotomy, which gives you good hamstring length, at the same time does not damage the hamstring mechanism and does not cause anterior pelvic tilt. But crouch means hamstring tight does not mean the problem is primarily in the knee. Please look at the ankle. Ankle needs to be sorted out first before you go there.
No, I'd like to have a caveat on what you said, Henry. One is when you sometimes get tightness of the tendo Achilles, they compensate by having a valgus. And unless you correct the valgus, you can't really unmask the tightness. And then what happens is they develop a rocker bottom foot. So that should not be allowed to happen. So if you are going to do something, you need to make sure that they don't develop a rocker bottom foot, and try and lengthen the tendo Achilles, but not that alone. Like you said, if you're ever doing hamstring lengthening, please do only fractional lengthening. And what I now do is to always transfer the semitendinosus to the back of the femur. So essentially it becomes an extensor. That is the problem. Otherwise, if you just leave it alone, you will again produce a stoop like that, because your pelvis starts tilting. Okay, so if you are doing anything to the hamstrings, please make sure that you transfer it to the back of the femur.
What I was saying was that the best way to progress is to do the serial casting first. Okay, so this is the best way to progress, because then you can understand that the patient and the family is compliant or not. Because after so many years, what actually happens is, as soon as you do surgery, the next time they will come to you will only after they get the secondary deformity. They never come back to you. Okay, so you do serial casting, and then you're able to understand them more. Then you have to have the compliance from the family, from the child, and you do whatever the magnificent surgery that you can think of. But if you cannot communicate to the child to do an exercise or whatever, what's the purpose of it? Because you will have like variable pictures. Some of them will have behavioral issues. Some will have some kind of autistic spectrum disorder. Some of them will have vision problems. Some of them will have hearing problem. So all of that you have to also consider before actually doing it. And Henry knows very well how much serial cast we used to do, I don't know, some 12 casts to each bilaterally. So it was like a massive hard day job. So you'll have 10 or 12 patients, and then you were doing bilateral AK cast. So this is the first step, I think. And then you have to also understand that, as he said, that there are two muscles. There is gastroc, and then you also have soleus. Both have a different kind of biomechanics. And then the deformities, as Dr. K. Matthews said, it's not that your tendo Achilles is short. The varus that you're looking at, the valgus that you're looking at, it is basically secondary to it's a compensatory thing for the tight tendo Achilles. So if you try to correct the heel, you will observe that the foot is like this. So it has not matured. It's like a monkey. Okay? Because monkey can get on the trees while keeping the feet like this. So it is not matured. So you have to correct that. And then you can do Grayson green or whatever to stabilize. Sir?
I was keeping quiet because I think all the correct things have already been said by all of you. The only absolute indications for surgery is torsions, hip at risk, patella alter, which is causing knee pain, and midfoot break. Most of the other time, it's really important to the big value of gait analysis tells you which is the primary deforming force and which is the compensation. When you don't use gait analysis, it's possible that you will correct you will make the condition worse because you treat the compensation. If you treat the compensation, the deformity will get worse. So follow up, serial casts, you can put a below knee cast, correct the foot as much as possible, and then see what happens to the knee. And so before gait analysis was available, this is what we would do. So correct the knee passively with a cast, and then see the ankle, see what happens to the knee. You'll get a good idea. And then if the problem is very severe at the knee as well, then do serial long leg casts and then see what's happened to the hip. Getting the child to do kneel walking, getting the child to do tests to look at what is happening to the primary hip extensor, primary knee extensor, primary dorsiflex of the ankle are all important. I feel that lots more harm is done when a prime mover is lengthened, because it's very difficult to strengthen a lengthened muscle. So fractional lengthening or careful lengthening only of the gastroc, not of the soleus, all those are strategies that you must use. So it was a good question because it brought in a lot of discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for wonderful session.